if we jump back to the beginning of the tune, I give you kind of a full glance, you can see that really the strings and brass are really featured back here on the back end. And up front, it's more just some light string work accompanying all of the live stuff up here at the top. So let's take a look at these string parts and see how I incorporated them with the live. So these are string harmonics from chamber strings, and I literally froze them just so that I could put them out of a separate output called, I think, high string sustains. Purely not for mixing, but for stems and interactivity with polyarc, so they could have that as a separate stem. That's really the only reason. And I've got this nice pizzicato. Then we've got sort of a blend here of cinematic studio trems and the consordino trems from chamber strings. But they're playing the exact same thing, which is just a very sort of obviously lots of suspensions. But I wanted it to be in a major key, and I love the idea of having those suspensions, which to me, a suspension is just basically like another chord in the chord progression. So if it goes from C to F, and then G suspended, and then G, to me, that's 4 chords, exactly the way I was playing it in the MIDI. It's a great way to sort of extend your progression and lead the listeners into what's coming next. Like you're emphasizing, like, this is major, when you have that suspension that resolves to the major. Or, I don't think I've ever done a minor suspension before because it's already so minor, but you could do that as well. You could use a suspension and go to the minor, and it emphasizes like, wow, okay, we're definitely minor. But for this, I wanted it to be definitely major. So that was cinematic studio strings. This is chamber strings, consord tremolo, which means they've got their mutes on. And I've got the bass in there as well. So as before, you can tell, brighter, a little more presence, a little more radio-ish, a little more hi-fi. And then together, it's just a nice blend. Now there's no bass, trem, consordino in chamber strings. I think there is a trem for cinematic studio strings, but a lot of times with the low end especially, I don't necessarily want it doing the trem thing. I want it to be more like a sub sine wave, sort of like just bah, kind of round sound. And when they tremolo, it takes a lot of the bottom out because it's just like digga 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 digga, and it loses a lot of the low end. So a lot of times when I have the high strings tremming, and maybe even the cellos, I will not have the basses tremming. I'll have them just doing a standard sustain. Just gives it a little more support. Now for the eagle-eyed among you, or eagle-eared, I'm not sure. This is the same chord progression that comes back at the end with the major key brass and sounds big and heroic. I'm just sort of doing a more plaintive, kind of simple version of that. And as far as the violin goes, all right, I think this will work. So this is the live violin, but you're looking at the MIDI part. Ba ba bum. That's sort of a theme from the game. I mean, what is there to say? That's such an amazing performance. It looks like he cut off at the exact same... I mean, Jeff and Kristin are just such incredible musicians. I can't recommend them enough if you need something. And all I did was send them the MIDI file, and you saw how closely he adhered to it. And not that I necessarily asked him to. If he had played that phrase a little longer and sustained at the end, it would have been totally fine. But he's just a perfectionist that way. So he played it exactly the way it was written. Kristin does the exact same thing. And they will embellish if you want them to. They'll use it as a jumping off point, or they'll read exactly what you have written. It's just really, really amazing having live musicians, especially on a score where there's technically no live music budget. So you're probably wondering, well, what did you use for the MIDI mock-up version of the violin and oboe? JB Solo Violin stands for Joshua Bell Violin, and this is the violin by Embertone. Probably the best vibrato I've ever heard in a solo violin. It's just absolutely lovely. So here, real quick, here is Jeff's phrase, just this initial phrase right here. And here is the MIDI version. And this is a hard thing to talk to producers or audio directors about because, like, that violin sounds really good, the Joshua Bell violin. It really sounds nice. But even with all that controller data that I had in there for expression is, I think, just dynamic volume, and then CC1 modulation is the vibrato of the violin. After you hear the live version, it sounds live. It's really dynamic, and the vibrato is just in the right spots, and the way the notes come back and forth really, really works. And if you hear the live version and then you hear the MIDI version sounds a little flat. It sounds a little lifeless. Not that the sampling is bad, the sampling is amazing, but it's the problem, the inherent problem with sampling is you're recording a note and the violin player just has to, they're doing whatever their vibrato is and they have to sustain that note like completely perfectly and make it as uniform as possible. So when it loops and goes back to the beginning, you're not getting a hitch in the overall performance. You have to do that because it's samples. And I know there's a lot of other sample libraries out there that have like phrases or kind of tempo-based things where the things breathe a little bit more, but I've never really found those libraries to be able to sit with what I want to do. It ends up I have to take what they do and sort of conform it kind of how I want it to be. And I don't want to do that. I want to write the way I want to write. I want to make my violin parts whatever I want them to be. And honestly, Joshua Bell is the closest that it gets for recreating that sort of performance. And there's a track in Moss that the violin was so amazing, I was listening to the MP3 demo that I sent to Polyarc, and I'd forgotten that I didn't get Jeff to play on it. So there's a Joshua Bell violin track, MIDI, in one of the final tracks for Moss. For the whole 5-minute thing, it's just live, no, it's not live, it's MIDI violin playing, unlike the last third of the cue, I think. It's the only time the violin's playing, but it's all MIDI, and it's a very kind of slow, lugubrious sort of thing, which is why I think I didn't pick up on it. These little more dancey, you know, da-ya, da-da-da-da kind of things, it really reveals the weakness in sampling. But for a placement, and as far as MIDI goes, it's definitely not bad. So I'm going to play this one more time. You know, it just sort of feels like it's sitting there. By no one's fault. If you're going to blame anyone, blame me, because I'm the one that wrote it and programmed it. Here's the live version. Yeah, come on. And that's just because the way the notes are and the way the legato is sampled and everything, it's a very straightforward kind of way. And Jeff is playing his legato and his vibrato and his note transitions all differently because of the way these notes are interacting live. It's just there's no comparison whatsoever. But still, best solo violin I've ever heard from MIDI, hands down. Now when we get to this next section, we just did the strings down here. So we get to this next section, I cannot overemphasize the importance of simplicity in your bass. And I say that I say that to myself as much as I say that to you. Actually, I'm talking to myself like all the time, saying it like less is more in the bass, less is more. Like the busier and the more stuff's going on kind of in the top end, the less you want happening in the bottom end. Kind of the same thing as I was talking about having the contrabasses not do the trem and just do the sustain, like dum, dun, 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 three. Just emphasizing downbeats and then the occasional little pickup here and there so that it's not completely square and like totally predictable. So we've got a 2-bar phrase. And here's another 2-bar phrase with a little hiccup right there. And then a 2-bar phrase where it kind of doesn't do the hiccup. And here is the 4-bar phrase. And then it's the same thing again over here. Just the little dom, dom, the extra G. It just helps break it up a little bit, but it still has a wonderful sense of space. So if I just played the strings here, nice and open and simple. And believe me, it did not start out this way, open and simple. It was not this simple, but this is like as simple as it gets here at 33. You can even see the white in Cubase means it's muted. So you can see where I had other instances of the ba-da-dum and I muted them and took them out. This is, I'm not ashamed to admit it because we're all friends here. I do this all the time. I overcompose. I write too much and I stack stuff up and I'm working on a 8-bar or a 16-bar phrase or a 32-bar phrase and I go back and it just sounds like the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. So I start sort of taking things out almost in a checkerboarding sort of way. So if it's playing here and here and here, I'll take it out in the middle so it's only playing here and it's not like 3 in a row. So kind of have it bounce back and forth a little bit, especially if it can bounce back and forth with another part so that they're sort of trading off kind of the attention that your ear is getting. Let's face it. Our brains are inherently built as pattern recognition machines. As soon as something is playing and doing the same thing in a repetitive way, our brain turns it off. It's the whole fight or flight thing, because it's like, well, that's obviously dependable. I don't have to pay attention to that anymore. Think about like a fluorescent lamp when you walk into a like college room and there's a when you first walk in and you notice it. After a couple minutes, most of us wouldn't notice it anymore because our brains have turned it off. Unless I mention it again and then the brain's like, wait, oh no, I do hear that, but it filters it out. So the same thing can be applied to parts and part writing with strings or brass or especially percussion. If this were, I think I can just unmute these. So this is what it was originally. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is kind of a beat 1, 4, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3. It's not consistent, but it's kind of playing all the time. So if I undo that and then listen to this version, less is more. I have to tell myself that all the time because I'm constantly stuffing more things in than needs to be done. And I think that's okay. That's just the way I naturally do it. I don't think there's anything wrong with kind of putting things in and then whittling them away. A lot of it depends on how much I can sort of hear in my head ahead of time. And this track is probably one of the most like, I have no idea what I'm doing or if this is even going to work kinds of tracks I've done, because this is combat. I mean, she is like swinging her sword and fighting and doing all this stuff and could die at any moment. So I think that's why a lot of my music with the MIDI especially, well, no, and with the live stuff was how many things can I stack on top and sort of feel comfortable that this is combat music, because it's really busy. And it feels so much better when it's more open and it has time to breathe. So I know that these dun 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 kind of staccato violins were over here at the beginning at first, and probably even a more busier part on top of that. And it's so amazing how leaving them out makes it feel like you're moving forward when they come in. I only had it sit out for 4 or 8 bars, but once they came in, it was like, this is the next part of the story. And as far as these shorts go, I'm doing the same thing. I'm doubling up with the chamber string shorts and the cinematic studio string shorts. So if we just started at 31, this is what both of them sound like. And the chamber strings, let's start at 33. Definitely pointier, more rosin, more attack. I think these are a lot smoother and more natural sounding, but also darker. So that's why when you have both of them together, you really get a nice blend. Plus, just the difference in the way the strings are attacked between each library, especially when you're talking about short strings, I think it sounds more like a band, like a live band, when you have multiple libraries together, because you're sort of having multiple attack articulations that are blending together in a way that kind of makes them feel more like multiple players and not just 5 MIDI patches that you're triggering single notes on. And then I've got some Berlin woodwinds up here that are doubling the same accents. Just for a nice kind of woody sort of feel, bass clarinets and bassoons.